The room went silent when Lord Matthias smiled. "Sign it, Your Majesty, or accept that 2,000 more will die because you were too proud to make peace." Patrick's quill touched parchment. Then a voice, quiet, trembling, impossible to ignore, cut through the room like a blade. "That document will kill you faster than any war." Every head turned. The Omega servant holding the wine tray shouldn't have spoken, shouldn't have been noticed, shouldn't have existed in this moment at all. Matthias's smile vanished. Patrick's hand froze 3 inches from sealing his kingdom's fate. And in the sudden, terrible silence, one question hung unanswered. How did a serving girl just stop a king from signing his own execution order? 48 hours earlier, Patrick Burke stood in the Great Hall believing he finally had peace within his grasp. The Treaty of Ashenmore lay on the council table, 18 months of brutal warfare reduced to 23 pages of calligraphic script. 2,000 warriors dead, 6 territories lost. His people starving while the Southern Coalition strangled their trade routes. This treaty promised to end it all. "The Coalition has accepted our terms," Lord Matthias announced, his silver beard gleaming in the candlelight. Patrick's chief advisor for 8 years, his father's trusted friend. "We've achieved an honorable peace, Your Majesty." The council erupted in relieved applause. Patrick felt the weight on his shoulders lighten fractionally. Finally, he could stop watching his people suffer. "I want to review every clause before signing," Patrick said. "Of course," Matthias smiled warmly. "I'll have the documents prepared for your private review. We have 48 hours before the coalition requires your signature." Only Patrick's brother Edmund looked troubled, his scarred face unreadable from across the table. Edmund had spent the war bleeding in the Eastern Territories, while Patrick negotiated here. He knew the cost of conflict better than anyone. "What are we giving them?" Edmund asked quietly. "Territorial concessions in the borderlands, trade agreements, a marriage alliance with Lady Anastasia of House Cordova." Matthias's tone suggested these were minor prices for peace. Edmund's frown deepened, but he said nothing more. The council dispersed. Patrick retreated to the stone chamber overlooking the mountains, needing solitude to process what came next. The treaty documents waited on the ancient table, sealed with wax and ribbon. He broke the seal and began reading. Section 1, Cessation of Hostilities. Standard. Section 2, Border Demarcations. Reasonable. Section 3, Trade Route Restoration. Necessary. Patrick's eyes glazed over the formal language. Matthias had assured him every clause was scrutinized. After 3 full reviews with the council, surely nothing dangerous remained hidden. He was so tired. 18 months of war had aged him a decade. At 32, Patrick felt ancient. "My lord?" The soft voice startled him. Patrick looked up to see a young woman in servant's gray standing in the doorway, a wooden tray trembling in her hands. Blonde hair in a practical braid, hazel eyes fixed on the floor. The almost imperceptible energy signature of an Omega, weakest designation in their hierarchy. "I brought wine, Your Majesty," she stammered. "Lord Matthias said you'd been here since dawn. I didn't mean to disturb." "Then don't." Patrick's voice came out harsher than intended. He turned back to the documents, dismissing her. But she didn't leave. He heard her cross the stone floor, heard the gentle clink of a goblet being placed on the far edge of his table. The scent of mulled wine mingled with old parchment. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," she said quietly. "But are you reviewing the Southern Coalition Treaty?" Patrick's jaw tightened. "That's not your concern, Omega." "Tiffany," she said softly. "My name is Tiffany Johnson, sire. I've worked in the castle for 4 years." He finally looked at her properly. Mid-20s, delicate features shadowed by exhaustion, and something else, a sharpness in her gaze that seemed wrong for a servant. "I'm sure your expertise is invaluable," Patrick said dryly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, by signing that treaty?" The question burst out before Tiffany could stop herself. Her eyes widened with horror. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "No, you shouldn't have." Patrick rose to his full height, alpha authority radiating from him. "Do you have any idea what's at stake? The coalition has our eastern flank surrounded. We've lost 2,000 warriors. This treaty is the only thing standing between my people and annihilation." Tiffany flinched but held her ground. "I know, Your Majesty. I served wine to Lord Matthias yesterday when they were celebrating. They spoke of your wisdom in accepting terms." She paused. "They also spoke of how relieved they were that you hadn't noticed certain clauses buried in the subsections." The chamber fell silent. Welcome back to the channel, my dear friends. Before we dive deeper into the story, kindly click subscribe, like this video, and tell me in the comments which country you are watching from. Your support helps me bring you more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. I shouldn't have said anything. I'm just a serving girl. What clauses? Patrick's voice cut like a blade. Tell me exactly what you heard. Tiffany's Omega instinct screamed at her to submit, to flee. But something stronger held her in place. I don't read very well, but I listen. When you serve wine, people forget you're there. Lord Matthias mentioned Section 12, Clause 4. Something about mineral rights, and Section 18 regarding succession laws if you died without an heir. Patrick's blood ran cold. He'd reviewed the treaty 3 times. The Thornwood Mountains were secured under Northern control. His brother would inherit if anything happened to him, standard protocol. Unless... His hands moved over the parchment with new urgency, flipping through sections. Section 12 was buried in Annex C. His eyes scanned the ornate script. There, Clause 4, Subsection B. Mineral extraction rights in perpetuity shall be granted to the Southern Coalition for all territories north of the Greywood River. North of the Greywood River. The Thornwood Mountains were south of it. But the wording granted the coalition everything north, including the Iron Vein mines, the source of 80% of Northern Territory wealth. They'd switched one word, north instead of south. Patrick's vision blurred with rage. And Section 18? His voice was deadly calm. Tiffany pointed with a shaking finger. There. It says if you die without an heir of Alpha blood and Southern Coalition approval, the territories revert to coalition governance. Your brother is Alpha, but they'd never approve him. Everyone knows Lord Edmund opposes the treaty. The treaty wasn't peace, it was a trap. Patrick looked at the girl before him, this Omega waitress who'd unraveled in minutes what his advisors had either missed or hidden. The implication of the latter sent ice through his veins. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why tell me this?" Tiffany met his eyes. "Because 4 years ago, your father gave my mother a healer when no one else would. She was Omega, sick, worthless by most standards, but the Alpha King sent his personal physician. My mother lived 5 more years because of his kindness." Her voice cracked. "I won't let his son destroy his legacy by signing that document." The storm outside broke, rain lashing the walls. Patrick stared at the treaty that would have destroyed everything, then at the serving girl who'd saved him. Everything he'd believed about strength and weakness suddenly seemed worth reconsidering. "What's your name again?" he asked. "Tiffany Johnson, Your Majesty." "Well, Tiffany Johnson." Patrick's smile was cold and dangerous. "You just saved the Northern Territories. Now help me figure out who's trying to destroy it." The wine cellar was cold and dark when Patrick summoned Tiffany an hour later. He couldn't risk meeting in his chambers. Too many servants, too many eyes. The cellar offered privacy and a legitimate reason for her presence. She descended the stairs with a single candle, her hands steadier than before, but still trembling slightly. "You're certain about what you heard?" Patrick asked without preamble. "Yes, Your Majesty. Lord Matthias and Lord Garrett were in the council chamber. I was refilling decanters. They thought I'd left." Tiffany set the candle on a barrel. "Matthias said the treaty was brilliantly constructed, that you'd never notice the directional changes or succession clauses until it was too late." Patrick's fists clenched. "Who else was involved in drafting this treaty?" "I don't know all the names, but I've heard Matthias meeting with Lord Pemberton late at night. And Captain Reeves of your guard, when I tried to warn him about suspicious activity last week, he laughed at me, called me hysterical." More names, more betrayal. Patrick felt his world tilting. How deep does this go? "Deep enough that I was afraid to tell anyone but you directly." Tiffany's voice was quiet. "They've been planning this for months, maybe years. This wasn't just about the treaty. They mentioned contingencies if you refused to sign." "What kind of contingencies?" "They didn't specify, but Garrett said something about your father's hunting accident not being an accident at all." Patrick went very still. His father had died 8 years ago when his horse spooked during a hunt, throwing him into a ravine. Investigated, ruled accidental, mourned as tragedy. "You think they murdered him?" I think Garrett's tone suggested he knew more than the official reports. Tiffany took a step closer. "Your Majesty, if they killed your father to advance their plans, what's stopping them from doing the same to you?" Patrick's mind raced. If Matthias and his conspirators had been planning this for years, if they'd already committed regicide once, then refusing to sign the treaty wouldn't be enough. They'd simply find another way to eliminate him. "I need proof," he said finally. "Accusations aren't enough. If I move against Pemberton and Garrett without evidence, I'll look like a tyrant purging anyone who questions me." "Then let me get proof," Tiffany heard herself offer before fully thinking it through. "I can get close to them, serve at their private meetings. They'll talk freely around me, they always do." "Absolutely not." Patrick's rejection was immediate. "If they're planning murder, if they killed my father, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens them, including an Omega servant who's suddenly showing up everywhere. They won't notice me. No one ever does. I notice you." The words came out rough, almost involuntary. Patrick seemed surprised by his own vehemence. "I mean, you're valuable to the intelligence operation. I can't risk losing my best asset." Tiffany's cheeks flushed. She told herself it was just the warmth of the wine cellar, though they both knew it wasn't. "I'm already at risk. The moment I warned you about the treaty, I became a target. The only question is whether that risk accomplishes something." Patrick opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, because she was right. She'd crossed the threshold the moment she'd chosen loyalty over safety. There was no going back to invisibility now. "Fine," he conceded, "but carefully. No unnecessary risks. If they even glance at you suspiciously, you extract yourself immediately. Understood?" "Understood." Tiffany allowed herself a small smile. "Though I should point out, you just gave orders to an Omega like she was a trained operative." "You are a trained operative. I'm training you right now." Patrick's expression softened slightly. "How are you holding up with all this? It can't be easy, living 2 lives." The question caught Tiffany off guard. When was the last time anyone in the castle had asked how she was? Not what she needed or what task required completion, but how she actually felt. "It's terrifying," she admitted. "Every conversation feels like walking a tightrope. Every overheard word could be a puzzle piece or a trap. I barely sleep. When I do, I dream about saying the wrong thing to the wrong person and waking up with a knife in my back. I can assign you protection. No. Tiffany cut him off gently. Guards following a serving girl would raise every suspicion you're trying to avoid. I'll manage. She straightened her spine, finding that core of courage again. Besides, you're dealing with potential assassins and a kingdom on the brink of war. I think I can handle eavesdropping on some arrogant nobles. Patrick's smile was genuine this time. You're braver than half my trained warriors. Or more foolish. There's a thin line. A bell chimed somewhere in the castle depths, the signal for morning meal service. Tiffany glanced toward the stairs. I need to get back. Gertrude will wonder what's taking so long. Right, the wine casks. Patrick moved to help her, lifting 2 of the heavy barrels with ease. Here, I'll help you carry. Absolutely not. Tiffany nearly laughed at the absurdity. The Alpha King carrying wine casks for a servant? That would raise more questions than a parade of guards. Patrick set the casks down, chagrined. Good point. I'm still adjusting to this whole secret operation concept. You're doing fine. Tiffany hoisted one cask, grunting slightly under the weight. For someone whose natural instinct is to command armies and give rousing speeches, you're managing subtlety remarkably well. High praise indeed. Patrick watched her struggle with the barrel. His hands twitched, clearly fighting the instinct to help. Same time tomorrow? Sunset in the wine cellar. I'll have more by then. Tiffany paused at the stairs. Your Majesty? Be careful with Lord Pemberton. If he was involved in your father's death, he's had 8 years to perfect his mask. He won't slip easily. Neither will I. Patrick's expression hardened into something regal and dangerous. My father died thinking he was surrounded by loyal friends. I won't make the same mistake. Tiffany nodded and climbed the stairs, the wine cask heavy in her arms but her purpose clear. She didn't see Patrick remain in the shadows, watching until she disappeared from view, his expression unreadable. That evening, the great hall blazed with candlelight and the low murmur of noble conversation. Patrick sat at the head table, Crown Prince Edmund to his right, the seat to his left conspicuously empty, the place of honor, traditionally reserved for the king's most trusted advisor, Matthias's seat. Lord Pemberton sat 3 positions down, his silver goblet raised in what looked like friendly toast. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with a well-trimmed beard and eyes that never quite matched his smile. 50-something, wealthy from inherited lands, politically connected through his late wife's family, and possibly a regicide. Patrick raised his own goblet in return, the picture of cordial leadership. Inside, rage simmered. Your Majesty, Pemberton called out, his voice carrying across the hall. A toast to wisdom in troubled times. May your decisions be guided by reason and experience, not rash emotion. The barb was subtle but unmistakable. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Edmund's hand moved toward his sword hilt. Patrick smiled instead. Indeed, Lord Pemberton, to wisdom. He drank, watching Pemberton over the rim of his goblet. And to loyalty. May we always know who our true friends are. The counterstrike landed. Pemberton's smile tightened fractionally. Servants moved through the hall, distributing the evening meal. Patrick saw Tiffany among them, her gray dress blending with the others, her blonde braid neat and unremarkable. She moved with practiced efficiency, filling goblets, clearing plates, invisible to everyone except Patrick. She was positioning herself near Pemberton's section of the table. Patrick forced himself to look away, to not draw attention to her with his gaze. The interrogations continue, Edmund murmured, leaning close. Matthias still won't give names, but 2 of the arrested guards cracked. They've confirmed at least 5 more conspirators, 3 servants, 2 minor nobles. Names? Edmund rattled them off quietly. Patrick recognized none of them as particularly important, which was probably the point. The real power players would insulate themselves with expendable pawns. "What about Pemberton?" Patrick asked, equally quiet. "Nothing concrete. He's been careful. No unexplained wealth, no suspicious correspondence, no obvious Southern ties." Edmund's scarred face twisted with frustration. Just a lot of meetings behind closed doors and carefully worded criticisms of your leadership. Not enough to arrest him on. Not even close. We'd need hard evidence, documents, witnesses, something that proves beyond doubt. Edmund stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing. "You have something. What did your little spy find?" Patrick watched Tiffany refill Pemberton's wine, her movements smooth and unremarkable. "Potentially? Evidence that my father's death wasn't an accident." Edmund's fork clattered against his plate. Several nobles looked over. He forced a smile, nodded, then leaned closer to Patrick with murderous intensity. "Explain. Now." Patrick relayed Tiffany's report in terse whispers. With each word, Edmund's expression grew darker. By the end, his knuckles were white around his knife handle. "If that's true," Edmund breathed, "if they killed our father, then we need proof before we act." Patrick gripped his brother's wrist, a silent command to stillness. "Rage makes us sloppy. We can't afford sloppy." "How can you be so calm?" "I'm not." Patrick's voice was ice wrapped around fire. "I'm absolutely furious. But fury channeled into strategy is power. Fury unleashed is just destruction." Edmund stared at him, seeing perhaps for the first time the man his brother had become. Not the diplomatic peacemaker who'd tried to end the war with treaties, someone harder, more dangerous, more like a king. "What do you need from me?" Edmund asked. "Keep pressure on Matthias. Someone will eventually crack and give us a name we can use. Meanwhile, I need you to investigate our father's hunting accident. Quietly. Find the original reports, interview anyone who was there, look for inconsistencies." That was 8 years ago. Memories fade. People die. Then find what remains. Patrick's eyes found Pemberton again. The Lord was laughing at something Lord Garrett had said, his whole demeanor relaxed and jovial. If they think we're looking into the past, they might make a mistake in the present. Edmund nodded slowly. "And the Omega? You trust her that much?" Patrick thought about Tiffany's trembling hands and unwavering courage, her admission of fear coupled with absolute determination. The way she'd risked everything for a kingdom that had given her nothing but scraps. "More than I trust most of my nobles," he said honestly. "That's a dangerous foundation for intelligence operations." "Trust is always dangerous. Doesn't make it wrong." Patrick pushed back from the table, standing. The hall quieted as all eyes turned to him. "My lords, ladies, I thank you for your continued counsel in these difficult times. Rest well tonight. Tomorrow we begin preparations for renewed negotiations with the Southern Coalition." Murmurs rippled through the hall. Pemberton's eyebrows rose. Garrett looked surprised. "Your Majesty," Pemberton called out, "forgive my confusion, but I thought the previous treaty was rejected?" "It was, because it was fundamentally flawed." Patrick's voice carried authority that silenced all whispers. "But my desire for peace hasn't changed, only my willingness to accept unfavorable terms. We'll negotiate from a position of strength this time, with advisors I actually trust." The message was clear. Matthias's faction was out. New players were needed. Patrick saw calculation flash across Pemberton's face. The Lord thought this was his opening, his chance to position himself as the new chief advisor. Let him think that. Ambitious men make mistakes. Patrick descended from the dais, Edmund at his side. Servants parted before them like water. As Patrick passed Tiffany, he didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her existence. But he did murmur, barely audible, "Red ribbon if you learn anything tonight." Her slight nod was the only indication she'd heard. 3 hours later, Patrick stood at his chamber window, watching the eastern tower. The castle had settled into its nighttime rhythm, corridors dark, guards at their posts, nobles and servants alike behind locked doors. No red ribbon fluttered in the eastern tower window. Patrick told himself that was good. It meant Tiffany was safe, that nothing urgent required his attention. It absolutely did not mean he was disappointed to not have an excuse to see her again tonight. He was still trying to convince himself of this when someone knocked. "Enter," Patrick called, hand moving instinctively to the dagger at his belt. Edmund stepped through, his expression grim. "We have a problem." Of course they did. "Which one?" "Pemberton just sent word. He's volunteered to lead the new treaty negotiations with the coalition. Says his family has long-standing relationships with several southern houses that could facilitate better terms." Patrick's blood chilled. He wants to handle the negotiations personally, which means he wants control of whatever agreement gets proposed, which means he's planning to insert the same traps as before, or worse. Patrick turned from the window, mind racing. We can't let him lead the negotiations, but we also can't refuse without evidence of wrongdoing. It'll look like petty vindictiveness. What if we appoint a co-negotiator? Someone to assist Pemberton, who's actually watching his every move? Who would we trust with that? Patrick started to pace. Everyone on the council is either confirmed traitor, suspected traitor, or so junior they'd be easily manipulated. Edmund's smile was sharp. Not everyone. "Who are you?" Patrick stopped. "No, absolutely not." "Why not? She's already proven she can spot deception that trained advisors miss. She's motivated to protect the kingdom, and she's the last person Pemberton would suspect. She's an Omega serving girl with no diplomatic experience. So we give her a crash course, train her in negotiation tactics, treaty language, the basics of political maneuvering." Edmund's enthusiasm was building. Think about it. Pemberton goes to the Southern Coalition with his assistant, someone so beneath his notice he talks freely in front of her. She spots the traps in real time and reports back to you. You can then request clarifications on specific clauses without revealing your source. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was potentially suicidal for Tiffany. She'd have to maintain the deception for weeks, Patrick argued, under constant scrutiny from both sides. One slip and she's dead, I know. Edmund's expression sobered. But she's already at risk. At least this way, she's positioned to actually stop the next conspiracy instead of just discovering it after the fact. Patrick wanted to refuse, wanted to keep Tiffany safely in the shadows, listening and reporting, but never directly in the line of fire. But Edmund was right. The best defense was positioning your pieces where they could actively counter the threat, not just observe it. I'll ask her, Patrick decided. Not order, ask. This has to be her choice. Fair enough. Edmund moved toward the door, then paused. Brother, you care about her. It wasn't a question. Patrick could have denied it, should have, probably. Instead, he said simply, she saved my kingdom. Of course I care about her welfare. That's not what I meant. I know. Patrick met his brother's eyes, but it's the only answer you're getting. Edmund grinned, the expression making his scarred face almost boyish. You're in so much trouble. Tell me something I don't know. After Edmund left, Patrick returned to the window. Still no red ribbon. Tiffany was probably asleep by now, exhausted from a full day of serving and spying. Tomorrow, he'd ask her to become something more dangerous than a spy. Tomorrow, he'd ask her to become a diplomat, and hope that he wasn't sending her to her death. The moon rose over the mountains, cold and distant. Somewhere beyond those peaks, the Southern Coalition was planning their next move. Patrick would be ready. He had to be. Too many people were counting on him now, including one brave Omega who deserved far better than a king who kept putting her in danger. But sometimes, the right thing and the safe thing weren't the same. Patrick just hoped Tiffany would forgive him when she realized how much more he was about to ask of her. The wine cellar smelled different at midnight. Less of oak and fermentation, more of secrets and stone. Tiffany descended the stairs with a single candle, her heart hammering so hard she was certain it would give her away. The red ribbon had been her idea, a simple signal system. She'd never imagined using it the same night it was established. Patrick emerged from the shadows so smoothly she barely gasped this time. He was fully armed now, sword at his hip, leather armor beneath his dark cloak, ready for violence at a moment's notice. What happened? His voice was urgent but controlled. Are you hurt? I'm fine. Tiffany set the candle on a barrel, her hands shaking slightly. But you need to hear this, tonight, before morning. Patrick moved closer, his presence both comforting and unnerving. Tell me. Tiffany took a steadying breath. After dinner, I volunteered to serve wine in the Eastern Tower. Lord Pemberton and Lord Garrett met there, just as I'd reported. But tonight, there was a third person. Who? I couldn't see his face clearly. He wore a hooded cloak, kept to the shadows. But his voice... Tiffany closed her eyes, recalling every detail. He had a Southern accent, not heavy but unmistakable, and Pemberton called him ambassador. Patrick went very still. A coalition ambassador. Here, in my castle. They're planning something for the negotiations. The ambassador said the coalition is prepared to offer more favorable terms this time, that they want to rebuild trust after the unfortunate misunderstanding with the previous treaty. That's a diplomatic way of saying they're upset their trap was discovered. Pemberton assured him it wouldn't happen again, said he'd personally oversee every clause, every word, that there would be no interference from compromised sources. Tiffany's voice dropped. They know someone warned you, Your Majesty. They don't know who, but they're looking. Patrick's jaw clenched. What else? The ambassador mentioned a timeline, said the coalition needs the treaty signed within 30 days, or they'll be forced to pursue alternative solutions. Pemberton asked what that meant. The ambassador smiled. I could hear it in his voice, and said, the same alternative we used with the previous Alpha King. The temperature in the wine cellar plummeted. Patrick's alpha power flared, making the candle flame dance wildly. They admitted it. His voice was barely human. They admitted murdering my father. Not directly, but the implication was clear enough. Tiffany had been frightened when she'd heard it, but watching Patrick's reaction now terrified her more. The rage rolling off him was a physical force. Your Majesty, you need to breathe. If you storm up there right now... I won't. Patrick forced himself back under control, though his hands remained clenched into fists. Because that's what they want. They want me emotional, reactive, making mistakes. He focused on Tiffany with visible effort. Was there anything else? Any specifics about their plans? Garrett mentioned the hunting trip, said it was scheduled for 2 weeks from now, that everything was arranged. Pemberton laughed and said, history does repeat itself if one is patient enough. Another hunting trip, another accident waiting to happen. They were going to kill him the same way they'd killed his father. They'll use the negotiations as cover, Patrick said, working through it aloud. Keep me distracted with diplomatic theater while they set up the assassination. Then, Pemberton steps in as interim leader, signs whatever treaty the coalition wants, and the Northern Territories fall without a single open battle. That's what it sounded like. Tiffany hesitated, then added quietly, the ambassador asked if Pemberton was certain he could manage the succession. Pemberton said Edmund would be handled separately, that your brother's heroics in the Eastern Territories had made him too popular with the army to eliminate publicly. But accidents happen to war heroes all the time. Patrick's eyes closed briefly. They're planning to kill us both. It would seem so. Silence fell, broken only by distant water dripping somewhere in the cellar's depths. Tiffany watched emotions war across Patrick's face, grief for his father, fear for his brother, rage at the conspiracy, and something else. Something that looked almost like relief. At least now I know, he said finally. For 8 years, I've wondered if I could have prevented my father's death. If I'd been more observant, more suspicious, more protective. But this started long before his murder. They've been planning this for a decade or more. Nothing I could have done would have stopped them then. You can stop them now. Can I? Patrick looked at her, and Tiffany saw vulnerability she'd never expected from an alpha king. How do I fight an enemy that's woven into the fabric of my own court, that's willing to spend years setting up the perfect trap? Every move I make against Pemberton without absolute proof risks civil war. But if I wait for absolute proof, I'll be dead. This was why he'd summoned her to the wine cellar at midnight, not just for information, for perspective. For someone who thought differently than his trained advisors and battle-hardened generals. Then don't fight them directly, Tiffany said slowly, an idea forming. Give them what they want. Patrick's eyebrows rose. You want me to let them assassinate me? I want you to let them try. Tiffany's mind was racing now, pieces clicking together. They're expecting you to be cautious after discovering the treaty trap. They're prepared for tighter security, for you to avoid situations where you're vulnerable. But what if you did the opposite? What if you announced a hunt, your idea, your initiative, to celebrate the upcoming negotiations? They'd see it as an opportunity. Exactly. They'd move up their timeline, rush their preparations. Rushed plans have mistakes. Mistakes we can exploit. Tiffany stepped closer, warming to the strategy. Meanwhile, you control every aspect of the hunt, the location, the participants, the route. You turn their trap into your trap. Patrick stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You're suggesting we stage a counter-assassination? I'm suggesting we let them reveal themselves through action rather than words. Overheard conversations can be denied, but if we catch them in the act of attempted regicide, with witnesses, with evidence, then we have grounds for execution that even their allies can't dispute. Patrick's smile was fierce and approving. You have a devious mind, Tiffany Johnson. I've spent 4 years watching Noble's scheme. I've learned a few things. She allowed herself a small smile. Though I should mention, this plan requires you to actually put yourself in mortal danger. As bait. I've been bait before, usually in battle, admittedly, but the principle's the same. Patrick's expression turned serious. But it can't just be me. If they're planning to handle Edmund separately, we need to protect him too. Tell him about the threat. Put him on guard, but don't change his routine. If Edmund suddenly becomes paranoid and defensive, Pemberton will know we're onto them. So we let my brother walk around with a target on his back and hope we catch the assassins before they strike? We make sure Edmund is never actually vulnerable. Extra guards disguised as servants, tasters for his food, someone loyal watching him at all times. Tiffany had thought this through during her frantic climb to the Eastern Tower to hang the red ribbon. The key is making them think they have opportunities when they actually have none. Patrick shook his head slowly, admiration and concern mixing in his expression. How are you so good at this? This isn't normal serving girl skill set. Tiffany's smile turned sad. When you're Omega in a world run by alphas, you learn to think 3 steps ahead or you don't survive. You learn to read people, anticipate their moves, position yourself where their plans can't touch you. She met his eyes. I've been playing defensive chess my entire life. This is just the first time the stakes are kingdom-sized instead of personal. And you're willing to risk your life for those stakes? Are you? It's my kingdom, my responsibility. It's my home too. Tiffany's voice strengthened. Every servant, every Omega, every person the nobles dismiss as insignificant, we're all part of this kingdom. What happens to it happens to us. Probably more than it happens to you, honestly. When kingdoms fall, kings are sometimes exiled. The rest of us are just slaughtered. The brutal honesty of it struck Patrick silent. She was right. The people with the least power were always the ones who paid the highest price for political failures. I won't let that happen, he said quietly, to you or anyone else under my protection. Then let me help you prevent it. Tiffany pulled a folded parchment from her dress pocket. I drew this while they were talking. It's rough, but... Patrick unfolded it, holding it close to the candlelight. It was a sketch of the Eastern Tower room from Tiffany's perspective. 3 figures around a table, arrows indicating their positions, notes scribbled in shaky handwriting about what each person had said. You drew this from memory? In the dark? I've always been good with visual details. Helps when you're trying to remember which noble prefers which wine vintage. Tiffany pointed to the hooded figure. I couldn't see his face, but he wore a ring on his right hand. 3 stones, emerald, ruby, sapphire. The candlelight caught it when he gestured. That's the official seal of House Cordova. Patrick's voice went cold. The same house that offered their daughter Anastasia as a marriage alliance in the original treaty. So the coalition is definitely involved in the conspiracy. More than involved, they're leading it. Patrick refolded the parchment carefully, his mind clearly racing through implications. Which means whatever favorable terms they're offering now are just as poisoned as before. Possibly worse. Then we need someone at those negotiations who can spot the traps in real time. Tiffany took a breath. Your brother suggested I should be that person. Patrick's head snapped up. Edmund told you about his idea? He found me in the kitchens before dinner, said you'd want to ask me yourself, but he wanted to give me time to think about it first. She smiled slightly. Very considerate for someone who called me the Omega in our first meeting. He's grown fond of you, thinks you're wasted on kitchen work. And you? The question escaped before Tiffany could stop it. What do you think? Patrick looked at her for a long moment. In the candlelight, his features seemed softer than usual, the weight of kingship temporarily lifted. When he spoke, his voice carried something beyond royal approval or strategic assessment. I think you're the most remarkable person I've ever met, he said simply. And I think asking you to risk your life again is unconscionable. But I'm going to ask anyway, because you're the only one I trust completely in this nightmare. Tiffany's breath caught. Not at the request. She'd already decided to accept before Edmund had even finished proposing it. But at the raw honesty in Patrick's voice. The way he looked at her like she was someone who mattered, not a tool, not an asset, a person. I'll do it, she said. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. If this goes wrong, if I'm discovered, if Pemberton realizes I'm working against him, you don't try to rescue me. Tiffany held up a hand to stop his immediate protest. I'm serious. If they capture me, they'll use me as bait to draw you into a trap. You can't take that bait. The kingdom is more important than one Omega's life. The hell it is. Patrick's alpha power flared again, protective and fierce. I don't sacrifice my people. Ever. Even if sacrificing one saves thousands, there's always another way. That's idealism talking, not strategy. Then call me an idealist. Patrick moved closer, close enough that Tiffany could feel the heat radiating from him. I will not build a kingdom on the graves of people who trusted me. I will not become the kind of king who calculates lives as acceptable losses. And I will not let you die for me, Tiffany. That's not negotiable. His vehemence should have frightened her. Instead, it made something warm unfurl in her chest. Something dangerous and completely inappropriate for an Omega servant to feel about her Alpha King. She squashed it ruthlessly. Fine, she said, trying for lightness. No martyrdom. I'll just have to not get caught. Preferably. Patrick seemed to realize how close they were standing and took a deliberate step back. We'll start your training tomorrow. Diplomatic protocols, negotiation tactics, treaty language. It'll be intensive. We have less than 2 weeks before Pemberton departs for the coalition border. Where will we train? If people see the king spending hours tutoring a serving girl, we'll say you're being educated as a gift, that I'm honoring your service in discovering the treaty flaws. Patrick was thinking aloud now, planning. It's unusual, but not unprecedented. My father educated several servants who showed exceptional loyalty. That'll make me a target. You're already a target. At least this way, you'll be a trained one. Patrick moved toward the stairs, then paused. Tiffany? Thank you. For the warning. For the intelligence. For being willing to do this despite every sane instinct telling you to run. Who says I'm sane? Tiffany managed a shaky smile. Sane people don't volunteer for suicide missions. Then we're both insane. Patrick's return smile was almost gentle. Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow, your real education begins. He disappeared up the stairs, leaving Tiffany alone with the guttering candle and her racing thoughts. What had she just agreed to? 2 weeks of intensive training, followed by weeks of diplomatic negotiations with people who'd murdered a king and planned to murder another. Maintaining a perfect deception while surrounded by enemies. One mistake, and she'd die screaming in ways she didn't want to imagine. This was insane. This was terrifying. This was absolutely, undeniably the right thing to do. Tiffany blew out the candle and made her way through the darkened cellar, using memory and touch to navigate. She'd spent 4 years invisible, surviving on the margins, keeping her head down and her ambitions small. That Tiffany had died the moment she'd walked into the treaty chamber. This new Tiffany, the one who confronted kings and infiltrated conspiracies, was someone she was still learning to be. But she liked her better. 14 days later, Tiffany stood in what had been a storage room and was now her private study, surrounded by books, maps, and documents. Her simple gray dress had been replaced with something slightly better, still servant class, but cleaner, newer. Her blonde hair was still braided, but now with a leather cord that marked her as educated staff. The transformation from invisible Omega to the king's honored tutor recipient had been gradual enough not to raise too many eyebrows, but fast enough to be ready for Pemberton's departure, which was tomorrow. Patrick entered without knocking. They'd long since abandoned such formalities during their training sessions. He carried a leather case filled with parchments. "Final examination," he announced, setting the case on her desk. "I've created a mock treaty with 15 deliberate traps hidden in the language. You have 2 hours to find them all." Tiffany groaned. "I thought we were done with tests." "We're never done, not when lives depend on your performance." But Patrick's stern words were softened by the pride in his eyes. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd watched her devour information like a starving person finding food. Treaty law, diplomatic protocols, the histories of every major house in both territories. She'd absorbed it all with a hunger that astounded him. She'd been wasted in the kitchens. 2 hours starting now. Tiffany opened the first document and began reading. Patrick watched her work, noting the fierce concentration on her face, the way her finger traced each line looking for inconsistencies. She developed tricks over the past weeks, reading clauses backward to catch directional switches, checking cross-references obsessively, questioning every assumption. 90 minutes later, she looked up. Finished already? Patrick moved to her side. How many did you find? 17. Patrick blinked. There were only 15. Then you missed 2 when you were planting them. Tiffany pointed to Section 9, Clause 3. This wording creates a loophole that could allow the coalition to claim mineral rights by arguing historical precedent, even though no such precedent exists. You probably didn't intend it as a trap, but it functions as one. Patrick scanned the clause. She was right. Damn it, she was right. And the 17th? Tiffany flipped to Annex D. This marriage clause specifies that offspring inherit based on primacy of bloodline, which sounds standard, but it doesn't specify which parent's bloodline takes precedence. In a mixed marriage between northern and southern houses, that ambiguity could trigger succession disputes that tear the kingdom apart. Patrick stared at the clause he'd written himself, seeing the trap he'd accidentally created. How did I miss that? Because you were thinking like someone who assumes good faith in treaty interpretation. I'm thinking like someone who assumes everyone is trying to screw everyone else. Tiffany's smile was wry. Paranoia is an excellent teacher. So I've noticed. Patrick sank into the chair across from her. You're ready. More than ready, honestly. You've learned in 2 weeks what takes most diplomats 2 years. I had excellent motivation. Tiffany began organizing the documents. Death tends to focus the mind wonderfully. About that. Patrick's expression turned serious. There's still time to back out. I can send someone else with Pemberton. Who? Edmund can't go. He's needed here to manage security. Your other nobles are either compromised or incompetent. Your generals know warfare, not diplomacy. Tiffany met his eyes steadily. It has to be me, and we both know it. I could go myself. And abandon the kingdom to Pemberton's schemes while you're at the coalition border for weeks? That's exactly what they want. She shook her head. No. You stay here, root out the remaining conspirators, and prepare for the hunting trip-trap. I'll handle Pemberton and the negotiations. Patrick wanted to argue, wanted to lock her in this room where she'd be safe, where he could protect her. But she was right about all of it, and they both knew he couldn't afford to let emotion override strategy. You'll have protection, he said instead. Edmund is assigning 3 guards to the diplomatic envoy. They'll be under orders to prioritize your safety over everyone else's, including Pemberton's. That'll raise questions. Let it. You're a valuable educational investment. The king protecting his assets is logical. Patrick leaned forward. But the guards are backup. Your primary protection is your wits and your training. If something feels wrong, trust that instinct. Extract yourself however you can. Understood. Tiffany hesitated, then asked, What about you? The hunt is in 5 days. Have you set the trap? Edmund's handling the logistics. We'll have 50 men positioned around the hunting grounds, all loyal, all ready to intervene the moment Pemberton's people make their move. Patrick's smile was cold. They think they're setting up an assassination. They're actually walking into an ambush. Be careful. Desperate men are dangerous men. I'll have Edmund watching my back, and I'll be thinking of you, miles away, doing something equally dangerous for equally insane reasons." Patrick stood, suddenly restless. "This plan is madness. Sending you into enemy territory while I deliberately make myself bait? If this were a story, everyone would call it terrible strategy." "Good thing it's real life, then." Tiffany rose too, moving around the desk. "Stories have to make sense. Reality just has to work." They stood facing each other, close enough that Tiffany had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Over the past 2 weeks, they'd spent hours together in this room, teacher and student at first, then colleagues, then something neither of them wanted to name but couldn't quite ignore. "When you return," Patrick said quietly, "when this is over and the conspirators are dealt with, don't." Tiffany put a hand on his arm, feeling the warmth of him through his sleeve. "Don't make promises about when this is over. It's bad luck. We focus on surviving tomorrow. We'll worry about the day after when we get there." Superstitious? Practical. But her hand didn't move from his arm. "Though, if we're both still alive when this is finished, I wouldn't object to a conversation about possibilities." Patrick's breath caught. Possibilities? Theoretical ones, purely academic. Tiffany's smile was tremulous. Like, what happens to Omega servants who've seen too many state secrets to ever return to normal life? Or kings who've learned to trust the wrong people for the right reasons? Those sound like complicated possibilities. Terrifyingly so. Tiffany withdrew her hand, stepping back, which is why we're not discussing them until we've survived the immediate murder attempts. Fair point. Patrick moved toward the door, then turned back. "Tiffany, whatever happens, with the negotiations, with the hunt, with anything, know that trusting you was the best decision I've made as king." The words settled into Tiffany's chest, warm and precious and terrifying. "Don't die proving it," she managed. Patrick's laugh was soft and sad. "I'll do my best." Then he was gone, and Tiffany was alone with 17 marked-up treaty documents and the crushing weight of what tomorrow would bring. Lord Pemberton, 3 guards, 2 servants, and 1 Omega girl who'd learned to read traps, against the entire Southern Coalition and their plans for conquest. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, her mind whispered. Absolutely everything. But she'd been preparing for this her entire life without knowing it. Every slight endured, every time she'd been overlooked or dismissed or treated as invisible, all of it had been training for exactly this moment. Time to show them what an insignificant Omega could do. Tiffany blew out the study candles and headed for her quarters. Tomorrow, the real game began, and she intended to win. The coalition border was 3 days' hard ride from the Northern Territories, and Lord Pemberton made certain everyone felt every mile of it. "Keep up, girl," he barked over his shoulder as Tiffany's horse struggled through another muddy stretch. "We're not stopping because you can't manage basic horsemanship." Tiffany bit back a retort and urged her mare forward. The 3 guards Edmund had assigned, Captain Riker, Lieutenant Moss, and Sergeant Thorne, rode in formation around them. All 3 were supposedly there for general protection, but Tiffany had caught them watching her specifically more than once. Patrick's orders being followed, even out here. The thought warmed her more than it should have. They'd been traveling for 2 days now. 2 days of Pemberton's condescension, interrupted only by his increasingly nervous conversations with Lord Garrett, who joined the envoy at the last minute. The 2 men thought they were being subtle, dropping their voices when discussing contingencies and backup arrangements. Tiffany heard every word. "The king should have received his hunting invitation by now," Garrett had murmured last night around the campfire. Everything is arranged for the 5th day. And if he doesn't take the bait, Pemberton had asked, then we proceed with the alternative. But he will. Burke men never could resist a good hunt. Garrett's smile had been visible even in the flickering firelight. It's in their blood, just like arrows will be soon enough. Tiffany had forced herself to remain still, to keep her breathing even, to play the exhausted servant dozing by the fire. Inside, rage had burned cold and bright. They were so confident, so certain of their superiority that they discussed murder in front of her like she was furniture. That confidence would be their downfall. Now, as they crested a hill and the coalition's border fortress came into view,
Tiffany felt her pulse quicken. Massive stone walls, flying banners of crimson and gold. Guard towers bristling with archers. And somewhere inside those walls, the people who'd orchestrated the treaty trap. Who'd murdered Patrick's father. Who planned to murder Patrick himself. Impressive, isn't it? Pemberton had ridden up beside her, his expression smug. The coalition knows how to build proper defenses. Not like our crumbling northern fortresses. It's certainly large, Tiffany said carefully, playing the odd servant. I've never seen anything like it. Of course you haven't. Your entire world has been castle kitchens and wine cellars. Pemberton's condescension dripped like poison. Try not to embarrass us during the negotiations. Speak only when spoken to, stay in your designated areas, and remember, you're here as a scribe, nothing more. Your education doesn't make you our equal. I understand completely, my lord. Tiffany kept her eyes downcast, her voice meek. But inside, she was cataloging everything. The fortress's layout, the number of visible guards, the supply wagons entering through the eastern gate, the escape routes if things went catastrophically wrong. Patrick had trained her well. The negotiation chamber was deliberately intimidating. High ceilings, cold stone, a massive table that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. 5 coalition representatives sat on one side, led by Ambassador Cordova himself, the man from the Eastern Tower, the one who'd smiled while discussing murder. He was younger than Tiffany had expected. Mid-40s, handsome in a sharp-featured way, with those distinctive rings on his right hand. 3 stones catching the lamplight. Emerald, ruby, sapphire. Lord Pemberton. Cordova's smile was welcoming, warm, completely false. How delightful to resume our negotiations. And I see you've brought assistance? A scribe. Pemberton gestured dismissively at Tiffany, who stood in the corner with parchment and ink. The king insisted on detailed records of our discussions. You know how he is about documentation. Indeed. Cordova's eyes lingered on Tiffany for just a moment too long. Then he smiled. Well, let us begin. We have much to discuss and limited time. I trust King Burke as well. Quite well. He sends his regards and his hopes for a mutually beneficial agreement. How gracious. Cordova unrolled a treaty document. We've revised our previous proposal to address the concerns that led to its unfortunate rejection. I think you'll find these terms much more palatable. Over the next 3 hours, Tiffany wrote furiously, recording every word while her mind analyzed every clause Cordova presented. The treaty looked different on the surface, cleaner language, fewer obvious traps. But underneath, there, Section 7, a clause about shared military coordination during external threats. That seemed reasonable until you realized it gave the coalition veto power over Northern Territory troop movements. And there, Annex B, subsection 3. Marriage terms that granted Lady Anastasia advisory authority in matters of succession, which, combined with the earlier clause about coalition approval of heirs, meant the coalition could effectively choose the next king. And there. The traps were subtler this time, buried deeper, but they were everywhere. The treaty wasn't a peace agreement. It was a slow-motion conquest wrapped in diplomatic language. These terms seem generous, Pemberton was saying, his voice carefully neutral. Almost too generous, if I may be frank. We've learned from our mistakes. Cordova's smile never wavered. The previous treaty was ham-fisted, designed by negotiators who didn't appreciate the value of subtlety. This version achieves the same goals through cooperation rather than coercion. Liar. Tiffany's pen moved across the parchment, recording his words while noting the truth beneath them. The goals weren't the same, they were worse. This treaty wouldn't just steal territory and wealth. It would hollow out the northern territories from within, leaving them a puppet kingdom dancing on coalition strings. "I'll need time to review these with my advisors," Pemberton said. "Of course. Take the evening. We reconvene tomorrow at dawn." Cordova stood, signaling the end of the session. "Your quarters have been prepared. I trust you'll find them comfortable." The quarters were too comfortable. Private chambers in the fortress's guest wing, appointed with fine furniture and expensive tapestries. The kind of rooms designed to make visitors feel honored while guards watched their every move. Tiffany had been assigned a small servant's room adjacent to Pemberton's suite. The moment she was alone, she began her real work. The treaty documents Cordova had provided sat on the small desk. Tiffany spread them out, cross-referencing clauses, checking for the patterns Patrick had taught her to spot. Hidden meanings in seemingly innocuous language. Contradictions between sections that created exploitable loopholes. Legal language that sounded protective but actually stripped away rights. For hours later, she'd identified 23 separate traps. 23 ways the coalition planned to destroy the Northern Territories without firing a single arrow. She needed to get this information to Patrick. But they were 3 days from the northern border, surrounded by coalition forces, with every movement watched. The guards Edmund had assigned couldn't smuggle out messages without raising suspicion. Carrier birds were monitored. Messengers would be intercepted. A knock on her door made Tiffany jump. "Yes." Captain Riker's voice came through the wood. "My lady, Lord Pemberton requests your presence. He wishes to discuss tomorrow's session." "My lady." Not girl, not Omega, not servant. The formal address was deliberate, a signal. Tiffany opened the door. Riker stood in the corridor, his expression professionally neutral. But his eyes held a question. "Of course, Captain. Lead the way." They walked through the fortress corridors in silence. But when they passed a shadowed alcove, Riker murmured, "Are you well?" "I'm fine. But I need to get word to the king. The treaty is poisoned. Worse than before. Can't be done safely. Not from here." Riker's voice was barely audible. "We're watched constantly. Any attempt to send messages will be intercepted. Then I'll have to carry the information back myself." Tiffany kept her voice equally low. "How long until we return?" "Negotiations could last a week or more. Longer if Pemberton drags them out." "A week." Patrick's hunt was in 2 days. If he didn't know the extent of the coalition's plans, if he went into that trap thinking it was just Pemberton and a few hired assassins. "I need to leave. Tonight." The decision crystallized even as she spoke it. "Tell Pemberton I fell ill. Food poisoning. Something that requires immediate return to Northern Territory for treatment. They'll never believe it. They will if I make them believe it." Tiffany's mind raced. "There are herbs in the fortress gardens. I saw them when we arrived. Silverleaf causes violent nausea within hours. Not fatal, but convincing enough." Riker stared at her. "You're going to poison yourself." "I'm going to make myself strategically ill. There's a difference." Tiffany's smile was grim. "I've spent my whole life learning which plants do what. Time to put that knowledge to use. The king will have my head if anything happens to you. The king will lose his if I don't get this information to him in time." Tiffany gripped Riker's arm. "This is the mission, Captain. Protecting me means helping me complete it, even if the method is unconventional." Riker's jaw worked. Finally, he nodded. "How long do we have?" "Silverleaf takes 3 to 4 hours to manifest symptoms. I'll consume it after my meeting with Pemberton. By midnight, I'll be convincingly ill. We depart at first light and ride hard. I can stay in the saddle long enough to reach Northern Territory, then recover conveniently." "This is insane." "Most good plans are." Tiffany managed a weak smile. "But it's necessary. Trust me." Pemberton's quarters smelled of wine and smugness. The Lord lounged in an upholstered chair, Lord Garrett beside him, both men radiating satisfaction. "Ah, our little scribe." Pemberton gestured for Tiffany to sit. She remained standing. "Tell me, girl, what did you think of today's negotiations? Did you understand any of what was discussed?" The condescension was so thick Tiffany could taste it. "Good. Let them underestimate her." "Some of it, my lord." The treaty seemed very detailed. Lots of sections about trade and territory. Very astute. Garrett's smile was patronizing. "And did you notice anything unusual in those sections?" This was a test. They were checking whether she'd spotted any of the traps. Whether the king's educated servant was actually a threat. Tiffany let her expression remain earnest and slightly confused. "Unusual, my lord?" It all seemed very official. Very proper. though I'll admit some of the language was complex for me. Pemberton relaxed visibly. As expected, treaty law is far beyond your education level. Don't trouble yourself trying to understand it. Just record what's said accurately. Yes, my lord. Tiffany bobbed a small curtsy. Will that be all? For tonight. We reconvene at dawn. Don't be late. Tiffany fled the room, her heart pounding. They'd tested her and found her wanting, exactly as she'd intended. Now they'd dismiss her as irrelevant, background noise while they plan their conquest. Perfect. She made her way to the fortress gardens, claiming she needed air. The guards followed at a distance, always watching, never close enough to hear. The silverleaf grew near the eastern wall, exactly where she'd spotted it that afternoon. Tiffany plucked 3 leaves, tucking them into her sleeve. Back in her quarters, she stared at the leaves for a long moment. Silverleaf poisoning was deeply unpleasant. Hours of vomiting, cramping fever. She'd seen kitchen workers accidentally consume it before. They'd been miserable for days. But Patrick was riding into an assassination attempt in 2 days. Edmund was watching his back. But what if there were coalition forces involved? What if Pemberton's conspiracy reached deeper than they'd discovered? What if Patrick died because Tiffany hadn't gotten crucial intelligence to him in time? She chewed the leaves, fighting her gag reflex at the bitter taste. Then she waited. 3 hours later, Tiffany was convinced she was dying. Her stomach cramped viciously. Sweat poured off her in waves. Every few minutes, she retched into the basin beside her bed, bringing up what little dinner she'd managed to consume. The silverleaf was working exactly as intended. It felt absolutely horrific. A pounding on her door. My lady, are you well? Riker. Right on schedule. Tiffany dry-heaved. I'm sick. Something I ate. The door burst open. Riker took one look at her pale, sweating face and immediately shouted for the fortress physician. Within minutes, Tiffany's room filled with people, coalition guards, a thin, severe doctor, Pemberton looking annoyed at being woken. The doctor examined her briefly. Food poisoning. Severe, but not life-threatening. She needs rest, bland food, and time to purge the toxin. How long? Pemberton demanded. Days. A week, perhaps. Unacceptable. We have negotiations. My lord. Riker stepped forward, his expression respectful but firm. The king will hold us responsible if harm comes to his investment. If this woman dies because we delayed her treatment, His Majesty will question our judgment in all matters. Pemberton's face contorted. He clearly wanted to refuse, to insist Tiffany suffer through the illness here. But Riker's logic was sound. If the educated servant died on Pemberton's watch, it would raise questions the Lord couldn't afford. Fine. Pemberton's voice dripped contempt. Take her back at first light. But you return immediately, Captain. I'll need your escort for the journey home once negotiations conclude. Yes, my lord. Ambassador Cordova appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. His eyes swept over the scene, Tiffany shaking in her bed, the physician, the guards. How unfortunate, he said smoothly. I hope it's nothing serious? Food poisoning, the physician repeated. She'll recover, but not here. Then of course she must return home. We wouldn't want King Burke thinking we poisoned his servant. Cordova's smile was pleasant. His eyes were calculating. Safe travels, my dear. I hope you feel better soon. Tiffany managed a weak nod, fighting another wave of nausea that wasn't entirely feigned. The room emptied. Riker remained, supposedly to stand guard. When they were alone, he whispered, You really poisoned yourself. You're completely insane. Committed, Tiffany corrected weakly. There's a difference. We leave in 4 hours. Can you ride? I'll manage. She had to. Patrick's life depended on it. The ride back was agony. Every jostle of the horse sent pain lancing through Tiffany's cramping stomach. The silverleaf effects were supposed to peak around 12 hours, which meant she was experiencing the worst of it while trying to stay in the saddle. But Riker had chosen the fastest route, and they were making excellent time. What had taken 3 days heading to the coalition border was taking barely 2 on the return. They rode through the night, stopped only when absolutely necessary, pushed the horses to their limits. Halfway through the second day, Tiffany spotted the Northern Territory border markers. Almost there, Riker said quietly. Can you make it? Tiffany nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The cramping had eased somewhat, the silverleaf working its way out of her system, but she was exhausted beyond measure. The treaty analysis kept running through her mind. 23 traps. 23 ways to destroy the kingdom. Patrick needed to know. Before the hunt. Before Pemberton returned with his poisoned agreement. Before everything fell apart. They crested the final hill and saw it. Smoke. Rising from the direction of the royal hunting grounds. Riker cursed viciously. We're too late. The hunt already happened. No. Tiffany urged her horse faster despite her body's protests. No, we're not. We can't be. They thundered toward the smoke, fear lending Tiffany strength she shouldn't have possessed. The hunting grounds came into view. Dozens of horses. Armed men. Bodies on the ground. So many bodies. Tiffany's heart stopped. Then she saw him. Patrick, standing in the center of the clearing, covered in blood but alive. Edmund beside him, equally bloodied. And kneeling before them, surrounded by guards with drawn swords. Lord Pemberton. No, that was impossible. Pemberton was at the coalition border. She'd just left him there. Unless. Tiffany's exhausted mind put the pieces together. The timeline. Pemberton insisting she return immediately, but Riker stay. Garrett's nervous comments. The way Cordova's eyes had calculated when he'd seen her illness. They'd known, or suspected, that she was more than she appeared. So they'd accelerated everything. Sent word ahead to spring the assassination attempt early, before she could return with intelligence. But they'd failed. Patrick was alive. Tiffany slid off her horse, her legs barely holding her. She stumbled toward the clearing, Riker supporting her. Patrick's head snapped up at the movement. His eyes widened. Tiffany. His voice carried shock and relief in equal measure. What are you? You're supposed to be at the coalition border. Poisoned herself to escape, Riker reported crisply. She discovered critical intelligence about the treaty. Insisted on returning immediately to warn you. Patrick crossed the clearing in 3 strides, catching Tiffany as her legs finally gave out. You poisoned yourself? You stubborn, brilliant, utterly reckless. The treaty. Tiffany gripped his arm, forcing words through her exhaustion. 23 traps. The coalition isn't just planning conquest. They're planning to hollow out the kingdom from within. Marriage terms, military clauses, succession laws. It's all designed to make you a puppet king within a year. And Pemberton, she looked at the kneeling lord. He was supposed to be in negotiations. How? Body double, Edmund called out. The man we were negotiating with was an actor wearing Pemberton's face. The real Pemberton never left Northern Territory. He's been here, planning the assassination, coordinating with coalition infiltrators in our ranks. We caught them all. Patrick's voice carried grim satisfaction. 50 men hidden around the hunting grounds, just like we planned. When the assassins made their move, we were ready. Captured 12 alive, including Pemberton. The rest, he gestured at the bodies. They chose to fight to the end. Tiffany sagged against him, relief and exhaustion overwhelming her. Then it worked. The trap worked. Thanks to you. Patrick supported her weight easily, his alpha strength the only thing keeping her upright. If you hadn't warned me about Pemberton's plans, I would have walked into this hunt unprepared. If you hadn't discovered the treaty details, I might have eventually signed whatever Pemberton brought back. You saved my life. Saved the kingdom. I just listened. And questioned things. Tiffany's vision was starting to blur. Like you taught me. Rest now. Patrick's voice gentled. You've done more than enough. But the 23 traps, you need to know. I will know. After you've recovered. Patrick lifted her effortlessly, cradling her against his chest. Edmund, handle the prisoners. I'm taking Tiffany back to the castle. About time, Edmund muttered, but he was grinning. We'll manage. You take care of your intelligence asset. The knowing tone in Edmund's voice made Tiffany flush even through her exhaustion. Patrick ignored his brother, carrying her toward his horse. This is highly improper, Tiffany mumbled. The king shouldn't carry servants. Good thing you're not a servant anymore. Patrick settled her in front of him on the saddle, his arms secure around her. You're my chief intelligence advisor. Effective immediately. That's not a real position. It is now. I'm the king. I can create positions. Patrick urged his horse into a gentle walk. Also, you're fired from being a servant. And from being an intelligence advisor. Tiffany blinked up at him in confusion. You just hired me and fired me in the same breath? Because both positions are beneath you. Patrick's expression was serious now, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. When you're recovered, when this crisis is past, I'm offering you a different position. If you want it. What position? Patrick looked down at her, and Tiffany saw everything in his eyes. The respect that had grown over weeks of training. The trust forged in shared danger. The connection neither of them had meant to develop but couldn't deny. "We'll discuss the details later," he said softly. "When you're not half dead from poisoning yourself for me. I'm holding you to that." Tiffany let her eyes close, finally allowing herself to feel safe. "Whatever position it is, though, I should warn you, I'm terrible at following orders. I've noticed." Patrick's laugh rumbled through his chest. "It's one of your best qualities." The ride back to the castle was a blur. Tiffany drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of Patrick's steady presence, the rhythmic gait of the horse, the sun warm on her face. When she woke, she was in a bed far too fine to be the servants' quarters. Silk sheets, carved furniture, windows overlooking the mountain range. The Queen's chambers. Her mother's old rooms, Patrick had told her once. Empty since her death. Reserved for. "You're awake." Patrick entered carrying a tray of food. Simple bread and broth, perfect for a recovering stomach. "The physician says the worst is over. You'll be back to full strength in a few days." Tiffany struggled to sit up. "I shouldn't be here. These rooms are exactly where you should be." Patrick set the tray down, his expression determined. "We need to talk. About everything. About the position I mentioned." "I'm listening." Patrick took a breath. "The kingdom needs reform. The hierarchy we've maintained for generations is broken. It allows people like Pemberton to rise through birth rather than merit, and it wastes people like you in kitchens when you should be in council chambers. I want to change that. Need to change that. That's ambitious. It's necessary. And I can't do it alone." Patrick met her eyes. "I need someone who understands both the servant's perspective and the political realities. Someone who can spot deception, who's earned loyalty rather than inherited it. Someone who's proven they'll risk everything for the kingdom's good." Tiffany's heart was racing. "You're describing your chief intelligence advisor again." "No, I'm describing my queen." The word hung in the air between them. Impossible. Unprecedented. An alpha king and an omega servant. It violated every rule of their hierarchy, challenged every tradition the Northern Territories had maintained for generations. "That's insane," Tiffany whispered. "Most good plans are." Patrick smiled, echoing her words from days ago. "Your words, remember? The nobles will revolt. The people will question your judgment. The other kingdoms will adjust or they won't. I don't particularly care." Patrick moved closer, taking her hand. "I've spent my entire reign doing what was expected, trusting who I was supposed to trust, following traditions that nearly destroyed everything. You taught me that strength isn't about designation. That wisdom comes from unexpected places. That sometimes the weakest voice in the room is the only honest one." "I'm not weak," Tiffany said, finding her spine even in her exhaustion. "I know. That's why I'm asking." Patrick's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I'm not offering this because I pity you or because I owe you a debt. I'm offering it because you're exactly the kind of leader this kingdom needs. Strong where I'm weak. Insightful where I'm blind. Courageous in ways that have nothing to do with swords or bloodlines." "And," Tiffany searched his face. "What else?" Patrick's smile turned soft, vulnerable, achingly honest. "And because somewhere between treaty clauses and conspiracy theories, I fell completely in love with you. Which probably should have no bearing on political decisions, but absolutely does because I'm apparently terrible at separating the personal from the professional." Tiffany's breath caught. Love. He'd said love. An alpha king loved her. The absurdity of it should have made her laugh. Instead, she found herself crying. Relief and joy and terror all mixed together. "I don't know how to be queen," she said through her tears. "Neither do I. But we'll figure it out together." Patrick wiped her tears with gentle fingers. "If you'll have me. If you're willing to take on one more impossible task." Tiffany thought about everything that had led to this moment. The overheard conversation. The treaty chamber. The weeks of training. The poison journey. Every impossible choice she'd made that should have killed her, but instead had brought her here. To silk sheets and mountain views and a king who saw her as an equal. Who saw her as more. "One condition," she said, echoing their first agreement. "Name it. When I tell you something is wrong, you listen. Whether it's about treaties or traditions or terrible ideas that might get us both killed." Tiffany gripped his hand. "I won't be a decorative queen. I won't be silent when I should speak. And I absolutely will not stop questioning everything, including you." Patrick's laugh was pure joy. "I would expect nothing less. Do we have an agreement?" Tiffany pulled him down and kissed him. It was brief, chaste, nothing like the kisses in stories. But it was real. And perfect. And absolutely, completely right. We have an agreement, she whispered against his lips. 6 months later, the Northern Territories celebrated 2 weddings. The first was a traditional royal ceremony. Patrick and Tiffany before hundreds of witnesses, priests and nobles and common folk, all crammed into the great hall to watch an Omega servant become their queen. The ceremony was beautiful. Proper. Exactly what tradition demanded. The second wedding was private. Just Patrick and Tiffany in the wine cellar where they'd plotted revolutions and shared secrets. Edmund presiding, Captain Riker witnessing. Wine and promises and laughter echoing off stone walls. Both ceremonies mattered, but Tiffany knew which one was real. The months since the conspiracy's collapse had been turbulent. Pemberton and his co-conspirators had been executed after trial. Garrett had turned evidence, revealing the depth of the coalition's infiltration. The poison treaty had been rejected. Real negotiations, honest ones, had begun with new coalition leadership after Ambassador Cordova's recall in disgrace. The reforms had started. Omega rights expanded. Merit-based advancement in the castle hierarchy. Education opportunities for servants. Tiffany's initiatives supported by Patrick's authority. It wasn't perfect. Change never was. But it was progress. And sometimes progress was enough. Now, standing on the castle balcony with Patrick's arm around her waist, Tiffany looked out over the mountains and thought about that terrified girl who'd brought wine to a king 6 months ago. She'd been so certain she'd die for her audacity. Instead, she'd lived. And in living, had discovered something more powerful than any designation or hierarchy. Purpose. Partnership. Love. Penny for your thoughts, my queen. Patrick murmured against her hair. Thinking about red ribbons, Tiffany said. And silver leaves. And all the insane decisions that led us here. Any regrets? Only that I didn't poison myself sooner. Tiffany turned in his arms, grinning at his scandalized expression. Think of all the time we wasted before I got strategically ill. You're terrible. You love me anyway. Desperately. Patrick kissed her forehead. Though I should mention, Edmund just informed me there's another conspiracy forming. Minor nobles unhappy about the Omega Queen. Nothing serious yet, but worth investigating. Want me to infiltrate? Tiffany was already mentally planning approaches. I want you to lead the investigation properly. As queen. With resources and authority. Patrick's smile was proud. No more hiding in shadows. You've earned the right to confront problems directly. Where's the fun in that? The fun is in watching nobles realize they're being outmaneuvered by someone they thought was beneath their notice. Patrick's expression turned wicked. I've actually grown quite fond of that look of shock when you prove them wrong. Flattery will get you everywhere. I certainly hope so. They stood together as the sun set over the Northern Territories, King and Queen, Alpha and Omega, 2 people who'd broken every rule to build something better. The future was uncertain. Threats remained. The coalition would test them again. Internal resistance would continue. But they'd face it together. And deep in the wine cellar, where a serving girl had once hidden behind a tapestry, a red ribbon hung forgotten in the shadows, a reminder of where everything had begun. Not with grand gestures or royal proclamations, but with courage, questions, and one person refusing to stay silent when silence would have been easier. Sometimes the weakest voice changes everything. Tiffany Johnson had proven that beyond doubt. And she was just getting started. The end. Patrick almost signed away his entire kingdom because he trusted the wrong people. Tiffany saved him because she refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. If this story of an Omega who changed everything moved you, subscribe to this channel for more werewolf fantasy stories where the powerless become powerful. Like this video if you believe speaking truth to power matters. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever had to choose between staying safe and doing what's right? Your story matters. Now, tap the video on your screen to discover another werewolf tale where an unexpected hero changes destiny. You won't want to miss what happens next.